Okay, so let me just think how to. Okay, so our dynamic models characterize dynamic hypotheses about the world, causal pathways that we believe to operate. Okay, that we believe there's reason to think that they're operating.
Yeah.
Now, those causal pathways, when we depict them, we are hypothesizing that there are relationships along the causal pathway of variables, one or more variables that influence another. Okay. And a lot of the time, the process, so those causal pathways involve positing processes that are taking place.
Yep.
So it may be people starting and quitting smoking,
Yeah.
starting and quitting e-cigarette use, or maybe my using e-cigarette now means it affects my likelihood of using a cigarette in the next little bit, and it affects my addiction level or whatever, my sort of craving for nicotine. Now, and similarly, we might have a model where we have sort of a dynamic hypothesis concerning people, what draws people to vendors, some behaviors that might draw them or not draw them to vendors in terms of risk awareness and perception, and that actually might be influenced by warmer weather, although it doesn't show it here, like in Saskatoon. Not many people go to the trucks in the winter, and then you seek food there, and this leads to some exposure to contaminated food. These relationships here, okay, like the presence of contaminated vendors, the way in which the weather impacts them, the impact of how exposure affects clinical illnesses, and how presence of clinical illnesses leads to affects food seeking in return, the impact on subclinical illnesses of exposure to food. A lot of these involve latent factors that we don't really know for sure. There's some uncertainties, particularly like how many cases of subclinical illness there are. We don't really have good data on that, okay? Just how much risk perception affects food seeking at vendors, okay? We're not sure about, and how that's related to risk awareness as gathered through social media or mass media or what have you. We're not sure how accuracy of recall, what the level of accuracy of people's recall is now, just how bad or how good their memory is.
Yeah.
And that is a key factor in progress of investigations to find contaminated vendors. So they'll literally ask someone, what did you eat 2 weeks ago? When did you eat at this certain vendor? What did you eat there? And they're asking someone to recall, did they go shopping for spinach that week? And it's weeks later sometimes, okay?
Yeah.
And so this accuracy of recall has a big impact, but we don't really know how accurate people's recall is, okay?
Yeah. I'm going to make a few notes.
Yeah, sure.
From my understanding. It is not.
So these are uncertainties, and there's latent factors associated with this, like the number of subclinical illnesses, okay? In the cases of smoking, we really don't know. There's a lot that's latent, smoking, e-cigarette use. We don't know, for example, to what degree are people using e-cigarettes with different levels of nicotine? How often are they using them, and for how long? When they use them, how does that affect their use of cigarettes? Like is it just I use e-cigarettes during the day because I'm in an environment where cigarette use is not allowed, but then in the evening I go back to cigarettes?
Yeah.
How often am I actually trying to quit from cigarettes in the presence of e-cigarettes? These are important uncertainties, okay? If I were dealing with contact patterns, there's big uncertainties about how much are people coming into contact, like within a certain range of contact, staying in contact? How broad are their circulation patterns? And critically, how do those behavioral patterns of mixing change in the event of an advisory,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Think about another example, waterborne illness, like in Southern California, people going surfing.
Yeah.
I understand there's a certain amount of surfing that even takes place in Australia.
Have it? Yeah.
Yeah. So in Southern California, there are these real issues with illness, but we don't know how big it is. And we're not sure, like when there's an advisory that's published, like they say the beach levels at dangerous levels of bacteria, how does that affect how often people go there? We have some estimates of bee populations, how long they spend in the water, how many of them get sick.
Yeah.
There's big, because most of it is subclinical. Most of it
That's
they don't
right,
go
exactly,
in.
yeah.
And yet it's a huge health burden probably of collective subclinical illnesses. So these are important, often they're important gaps in our knowledge of these things,
Yeah.
okay? And they're also, so let me characterize those gaps, Kim, as relating to several different types of factors, okay? And this goes back to some of my opening comments for this boot camp. One of these gaps relates to outcomes, things like subclinical illnesses that you
Yeah.
wouldn't otherwise measure.
Yeah.
Others relate to risk factors like exposure. How long are they expending in the water? How often are they going to food trucks? See what I mean?
Yep.
How often are they in contact with each other? Okay. These are cases of where there's exposures going on. Another one would be, how often am I outside and exposed to particulate matter?
That's right. How people
Or to sun,
respond.
right?
Yeah.
You know, how does to what degree is my sun-related circulation, my circulation outside, do I have personal protective behaviors? Am I wearing a hat? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so we might build a model of exposure to sun, or exposure to foodborne illness, or model of exposure to polluted water in surfing. But there's a certain amount of guesswork that goes on about people's behavior, and if we want to investigate interventions, we've got to posit something about how does an advisory affect, water seeking.
Yeah.
How does it affect people's going to food trucks if the weather turns really hot? How does it affect it if they hear there's an investigation underway,
Yeah.
that there's been a foodborne illness outbreak? How does it affect it in terms of the occurrence of how does it affect the behavior if we have an intervention that focuses on urging people to engage in social distancing?
Yeah.
Okay, so the smartphones can be really good at picking up a lot of these factors. Smartphones and wearables.
Yeah.
Think about a wearable. It might measure the time that you're in the water swimming, because it can pick up aspects of kind of movement associated with that.
Yeah.
Or it might pick up through GPS, or GPS combined with Bluetooth beacons, how long you're spending near the food trucks, and might ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
It's not only sensor data, it's questionnaires too. It might ask you questions about risk perception, and ask to what degree you've seen recent stories, and check how does that affect your time, going and visiting vendors. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
And these visitation to vendors might be things that otherwise we're not sure about how often they're going there, but we can track with phones how often they are, and we can relate it to their answers to these things. Similarly, with recall, we can ask them as a photograph on the phone what they were exposed to and compare it to what they can recall a week later, 2 weeks later. And we have done this in great detail, like with this, asking what did you eat a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Similarly, and this is a key thing, we can ask people to report cases where they feel ill,
Yep.
even at a level they don't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So we can get some understanding of likely subclinical illnesses here, okay? And we can, and think about that. I mean, that can allow us to better track down their exposure to contaminated food. But so the phones can capture outcomes
Yeah.
of sorts, like subclinical illnesses. They can capture.
So we try to use the smartphone to capture the knowledge gap.
Yes.
The bit that
Yes.
we definitely feel uncertain about.
That's right, and but it's often something we want to know about from the model, right?
Yeah.
We want to know something about how people's alcohol consumption or people's consumption of certain types of medication. To what degree they're taking their pain meds frequently or irregularly. So we try to use it to fill in some of those gaps that could be represented in the model directly, or that relate to model outcomes. You know, what the model thinks is going on for subclinical illnesses. So I want to distinguish something here, okay? This is a very big distinction. So I was just saying, from one hand, the phones are filling in gaps about outcomes, filling in gaps about risk factors.
Yeah.
You know, how often you're wearing your long sleeve shirts outside or hats, that sort of thing. How often, in the context of mosquito-borne illness, dengue, or what have you, or West Nile, how often am I wearing personal protective behavior, bug spray,
That's
that
right,
sort of
yeah.
stuff, right?
You guys are live. Get on this camera.
Well, we are. It's recording. Yeah. So you know, we could use the phones and this to sort of capture aspects of people's personal protective behavior,
Yeah.
risk factors, and exposures.
Yeah.
Right? How often are they spending outside? How often are they exposed to sun?
Yeah.
And imagine relating that like to outcomes in terms of sunburn, right?
Yeah.
Or blistering sunburn or something like that,
Yeah.
right? So you can see some things filling in there, but I want to. You could also use it to choice behavior, okay,
Yeah.
et cetera. But and to knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, my perception,
Yeah.
my beliefs about the efficacy of sunscreen, my
Yeah.
beliefs about the
Perception. Yeah.
efficacy of non-DEET versus DEET bug spray.
Yeah.
My maybe you'll you would relate my willingness to go to become vaccinated
Yep,
with
absolutely.
my beliefs about the efficacy of vaccination,
Yeah.
or my contact patterns related to my vaccination history.
Yeah.
These are big gaps
What
in
is
our
the
knowledge.
contact patterns in that sense? Like
Contact,
who
like
do
who's
I-
like, remember those transmission models of
Yeah.
infectious disease?
yes, who I
Who I meet at
Yeah.
close contact, close
Yeah.
enough that if I were to cough, you might catch the bug, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Now, for different types of illness, it would be different levels of
Yeah.
closeness. One,
Yeah.
it might be, you could get it from 5 meters away. Others, it requires very close droplet or sort of truly airborne. But the point is, there's a notion of contact, and to what degree is my hygienic behavior being affected by advisories or being
That's
affected by my vaccination history? Maybe I didn't get vaccinated this year, and therefore, when the flu comes around, I'm extra careful about washing, and I'm
Yeah.
extra careful about my contact patterns and hygiene. I go to study in the library to escape my graduate students being sick or something like that, or fellow graduate students or something, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's possible. It's possible that I would, or that I stay home
Oh yeah.
if my cubicle mate is
Yeah,
sick.
sick,
I work
yeah.
from home today.
Yeah, that's right.
The point is, these are aspects of human behavior, and in our modeling, we have a representation. Remember those contact networks in our modeling?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So, and then I have a certain, do you remember messages get
Yeah.
sent? I send you a message saying
Yeah.
you're exposed. Well, Well, if you have better hygiene, you might only get a small fraction of those messages.
Yeah.
Or maybe because of the influenza advisory, I, as the potentially ill one, stay home,
Yeah.
and therefore I don't expose you, so you get fewer messages. Do you see what I
That's right.
mean?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so
And,
so
so it's like,
so,
yeah. Okay, cool. No.
so
I'm just trying to
in-
summarize.
in these, right.
Yeah.
Okay, but a key point here,
Mm.
it's that some of these messages relate to, or some of these factors, these latent factors,
Mm.
relate to model assumptions or inputs or parameters.
Yeah.
Like, how often do you go to the truck under different warmth of
Yeah.
weather?
Yeah.
Or how does your risk perception affect that? Those are things we might put into the model.
Yeah.
And how is your risk perception affected by media,
Yeah.
etc.? We might put something in the model that expresses that, okay?
Yeah.
But then certain of them relate to outcomes, like outcomes in terms of outcomes of the model, like how many cases of subclinical illness. We don't tell the model what to assume there. It produces that over time
right, yeah.
as we run it. And we expect it to match that over time.
Yeah.
It needs to match. If it's got a good accounting for what's going on here, we'd expect it to produce subclinical illness levels that match. Okay, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
So basically, the smartphone can collect the data as an input to inform the model, but at the same time, you can actually collect the data to validate or to
that's right,
calibrate.
to calibrate the
Yeah.
model. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have in here some examples of like particular smartphone surveys. Like, so maybe I have a button that says I'm eating right now, another word that I'm feeling sick.
Yeah.
And you know, this relates, for example, when I'm eating at home or when I'm eating at a
Yeah.
at a vendor, and this is my cases of illness.
Yeah.
Okay. And I might use this to relate like the risks associated with eating at a vendor compared to eating at home, and I
Yeah.
might use that in my model in terms of kind of some sort of risk components.
Yeah.
Let's go to this. So this is sort of filling in the gaps here. Okay,
Yeah.
so here we have things represented perhaps in the model, and take a look at this. Like we might fill in these items here. Okay, some of
Yeah.
these more for calibration or validation, and some for the assumption. So for parameter estimation, for example, with illness exposure, what fraction of people are clinical or
Yeah.
subclinical? That might be something that we can try to estimate from the model, because we get reports, did someone go to the doctor or not
Yeah.
when they're feeling ill?
Yeah.
Okay. And you might argue, well, we don't know for sure, it's foodborne illness, fair enough. We might have representation of illness in general. Some go clinical, some go subclinical. But we have some sense of what that division is
Right.
because of the data. We know something about how long it is after a clinical illness versus subclinical that they'll start circulating it, going to restaurants again, right?
Yep.
That might be something we need in the model because people are getting sick, and we want to ask, okay, once you get sick with clinical illness, do you stay avoiding restaurants for a lot more time than with a subclinical illness, or no illness at all? These are things we could pick up in the data,
Yeah.
right?
That's true.
That people, after getting sick, tend to have very low rates of food seeking in vendors.
Can I just get my notes, because I think I can write better.
Can.
Oh. Oopsie. I think I can draw better.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because
I can send you these slides. I mean, this is.
Yeah, no, but I think this is my AnyLogic book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I admire that. That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
because I think it's just the way that I visualize things
Yeah,
is I always feel it's easier.
sure. So, like, you might use it some for parameter estimation for things you put into the model. Other times you use it for matching against model predictions, dynamic
Yes.
model predictions.
Yep.
And
So
and often
around
there's
that.
a lot of analysis that goes on before that. You know, for example, here we might do a recurrence events analysis or something like that with this data to try to understand how does eating at a vendor, you know, expose you to more risk or something like
that's
that.
right. So because I think a lot of the time at the moment the way the data
Yeah.
is analyzed or a hypothesis is answered
Yeah.
is they run a regression.
Yeah.
And then they just take the coefficient
Mhm.
and they say, well, if you eat at the vendor outside,
Yeah.
you know, then your probability of getting sick is increased by such and such and such.
Right, there's an association there.
Yes, that's right.
For that. And for some things in the model, we might be willing to do that. But for the model as a whole, we want to be asking about situations we've never observed.
That's right.
So we can't directly do that, you know, for the overall outcomes.
That's right.
We are asking about counterfactual situations which have not been previously observed
yeah.
where there's no data available. But, you know, certain things we may want to put into the model very directly. So, Kim, like,
Yeah.
how frequently do people go out to eat versus eating in the home,
That's
right?
right, yep.
That might be something that we're not seeking the model to produce as much. We're seeking to kind of use it as a baseline rate in our model, right?
Yeah.
Although we might then modify that rate when they've been sick after
Yes.
an amount of time. So here we are putting in some data here for parameter estimation, and you'll notice here that I comment on some things that affect parameter estimation, but then also. So you might, you know, frequency of eating homemade versus non-homemade food. How often do they go out to eat versus
Yeah,
other?
that's right.
If they're healthy. You
Yeah.
know. Frequency of care-seeking behavior given illness. How long the illness is, duration of where and what food is consumed, or no, so where and what food is consumed. Duration of impact of illness on food-seeking behavior. How long do they stop? But meanwhile, calibration. Here we might be seeking the model to match out, you know, in the model, for example, how often is it that foodborne illness is occurring
Yeah.
versus in the, you know, in the data, for example, plausible foodborne illness. And potentially how long is it till sort of violations are identified, okay? So these are some examples of calibration, but you know this.
Can I just get a question back there?
For
example, when you're talking about frequency of home eating and homemade,
Yeah.
and then you can ask them, you know, how often are you eating outside?
Yeah.
But then someone will say, well, the behavior of someone who eating
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
or not tend to depend on their age, you know,
Sure.
their maybe gender
Sure.
or education level, for
Sure.
instance.
Sure.
And how do we control for it, or we just think about it as an average? Or
Well, okay. So it's a good question.
or we
there's
should
several-
have something like
The-
develop a bit further of that
Yeah.
to understand more pathway, or there's an underlying thing that we can just assume it
Okay.
doesn't matter.
Well, okay. So this is the deal. So what I'd say is, with dynamic models, I've expressed this in many boot camps, and you've heard it. You need to start simple.
Yes,
Very
that's
important to
correct.
start
Yes,
simple.
yes, right.
And once you have a dynamic model built of certain things, it's a nonlinear system normally, and so you can test how sensitive is it to certain assumptions about certain factors. How sensitive is it to this application of food-seeking behavior or what have you. Now, you do that to help you prioritize how, what should I do next, okay? Which
Yeah.
of these should I expand next? On which of them do I need extra detail represented? If it's really, really insensitive to food-seeking behavior, I'd be hesitant to put, to how that impacts
Yeah.
foodborne illness. I'd be hesitant to put much effort. If it's very sensitive, I'd say, yeah, that might be something we want to capture, okay? And then, yes, you could break it down further. With the smartphones, we can ask on baseline survey, what's people's age? We can ask, what's their gender? And we could break down the rates of food seeking accordingly in the dynamic model, right?
Yeah.
And it may be that men and women do have different rates of illness. I mean, they might eat different things at vendors, amongst other things, right? They report different foods, and therefore capturing some aspects of food seeking and the risk given food seeking activity risk, the likelihood of getting sick. That might be something which we could try to represent separately for men and women. I have no problem with that. It's just you want to start simple, and you want to learn from a simple model by sensitivity analysis, and you may discover some really interesting behavior before you go and you start disaggregating these things by a lot of factors. You want to be very cautious about, saying, okay, we're going to build a super big model, and before we get any results, it has to be built. You want to build something small, try it, learn from it, experiment with it a bit, and then start adding to it.
So it's really like you had a model of trying to explain something, understand the behavior.
That's right.
And then you go and collect the data to fit in that model, or you try to understand the sensitivity within that model, which variable is important to collect. And then you go and collect it, and maybe you collect in a certain scale.
That's right.
Then you refine the model based
That's
on the
right.
data you've seen.
That's right.
It fit in the model, it developed the model more, and maybe you've seen more interesting thing, and you go and collect more
That's
data.
right.
So it's like a loop that is continuously.
Precisely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Precisely.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and a
I
lot-
think that's sort of a key that I really want to
Yeah.
understand.
And a lot of the issue there, Kim, is that, with these, and one of the reasons I started doing this work with the smartphones, first started experimenting with this sort of smartphone work back in 2003 or so on, and a lot of the motivation is the fact that we as modelers, I feel like a data buzzard a lot of the time, in the sense that I'm relying on this dog's breakfast of different data sources. I don't have
That's
data
exactly
for
how
my
I feel.
jurisdiction
That's right.
about this issue or that issue, and
The
so
thing
I'm.
that I want, and the thing that I think is important is not there.
That's right.
Yes,
And
that's
so often-
absolutely that's how I feel all the time.
And often, when we build these models, even if they're fairly simple, they represent, or they involve some assumptions. And sometimes even I will admit candidly, sometimes it feels a bit speculative in the model. Now, we have to in science build working hypotheses. And there's nothing shameful about having a working hypothesis
Absolutely
that we
not. Yeah,
test.
that's right.
But it would be really nice to be able to have more evidence to inform parts of the model, particularly evidence from areas of our, of the jurisdiction of interest, evidence as to the particular behaviors we're talking about. Because there's a lot of data out there, Kim, which is collected with traditional instruments, which is good, but it's very coarse grained. And so when it comes to things like people's eating behavior,
Yeah.
people's physical activity, people's sedentary behavior, people's contact patterns, people's movement patterns, to the degree that those things matter in our model, and you know, we can do some sensitivity analysis with a dynamic model, but we can also reason about how critical are these for understanding the effects of interventions. For example, maybe our intervention works through changing mobility behavior by closing beaches or something.
That's right.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe it works by shutting down schools, which changes contact patterns. And, you know, if we've got these things that get modified by interventions, changed in known ways, or changed in ways that radically alter them, we often want to have more information about what their baseline values are.
Yeah.
You know, and so there, filling in those gaps for assumptions and the parameter values is really important. And having some point of reference to test the dynamic model against when we run it, to see, is it jibing with evidence that we've been able to capture about outcomes or what have you. So outcomes, occurrences of sunburn. Suppose we're dealing with, you know, models of sunburn and trying to understand, for example, what might the efficacy be of sunburn, of sort of sun exposure related messaging, advisories and so
That's
on
right, yeah.
during the summer months, except for stuff like that. There's Jeff, and he was on the prowl. That's okay. I think he's engaged in food-seeking behavior. So
I just thought that he might looking for you. So.
yeah, he may be, but my voice has a way of carrying.
Okay.
So the point is, if we had a model of that, Kim, you know, we might have estimates as to sunburn occurrence. You know, in another Australian jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But it might not be really nicely broken down for personal protective behavior, or by month of the year, or by sort of the advisory context or something like that. So
or even consequence of how many cases develop into cancer.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so we'd like something which for our jurisdiction gives us some point of reference. You know, again, the dengue fever example, you know, a big uncertainty associated with vector-borne illness concerns people's behavior.
I thought you were being filmed.
No.
Everyone said
Fireside chat.
that. Yeah.
No. Oh man, what are these things? Oh,
No
it's
idea.
hummus and falafel. That's
Yeah.
okay. Well, I'll retain them until
Till required.
hunger strikes.
You want some tea?
Oh, don't mind if I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you think about something like, so we have quite elaborate models associated with West Nile virus.
Yeah.
It's a mosquito-borne illness, right? Very detailed models of mosquito and bird interactions, birds of the reservoir species, their biting of humans, human progression in cases.
Yeah.
We have some data which ties down the number of cases over time, and we have some data on, well, we had some data on bird prevalence, and mosquito prevalence we have over time. But, you know, we don't have very good data at all on human behavior.
Yeah.
Like,
Well-
when you have an advisory, like how much
Yeah.
do people behavior change? How long does it change for?
Yeah. I think because studying birds and animals
Yeah.
is always easier to get ethics than studying human.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think, that's probably right.
Yeah, because it would be really hard.
so-
Like, I would really love to be able to just have a chip and put on my participant.
Well,
Yeah,
that's right.
but
But that
that's
chip
not
is called a
really-
smartphone.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
It's a big chip.
Yeah.
Right? Chip off the old block.
Yeah.
It's let's put it this way. I mean, part of the reason people haven't done it is because with traditional instruments, asking people to reliably report their encounters with mosquitoes
Yeah.
and where they have circulated,
Yeah.
and linking that with mosquito counts, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Asking them
Absolutely. Yeah.
to report, how often have they been in this region or that region, or, where did you spend your time? It's really burdensome. It's not very feasible.
Yeah.
Not very accurate either, from what our evidence suggests. So the fact that we have a smartphone that can track, okay, what is the exposure index for this person
Yeah,
in terms
that's
of
right.
the vector risk index for this particular person? How often are they outside? Where are they outside?
Yeah, that's
And-
right.
And
absolutely.
how long?
Yeah.
Where are they spending their time? To what degree are they in rural areas with very high, rates? To what degree are they in areas with few rates? That's something we can have we can try to calculate, and we can look at, okay, when there's an advisory, how does their behavior change? And then we could put those in for the baseline and for the intervention case of a model. And that's just a piece of it, right? That's just exposure. And the model would help us understand the implications, that the flow through in terms of how many people get sick and how many people then develop severe neurological symptoms, and of those, how many present to the hospital, how many die. The model can sort of help understand the distal implications of this. But fundamentally, we need some evidence to tie down the behavior change and the behavioral baseline for sort of exposure.
Yeah.
And, if we have that data from Ontario, or we have that data from Nebraska,
Yeah.
I feel awkward using that for Saskatchewan. I'm saying,
Yeah, right.
California data is, it just doesn't,
Well,
Doesn't feel
completely
like-
different weather.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And living environment, you can't
That's
really
right.
compare.
Exactly. Same thing with exposure to particulates,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
exposure to pollen levels, or exposure to UV. Or,
Yeah.
And here with a phone, we can pick up that, we can get
Yeah.
a sense of that. And that's just a piece of our dynamic model. Our dynamic model is much bigger than that. It has to
Yeah.
do with intervention, has to do with multiple articulated causal pathways. But we fill in these kind of key gaps in the causal pathways. We take it out of the realm of speculation, and we
Yeah.
tie it to evidence collected in the appropriate jurisdictions of interest. And we cease being
It's recorded.
longer. It is being
Yeah.
recorded. We cease being we cease our existence as mere buzzards, and we're elevated to the status of eagles. That's, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
No, yeah. It's definitely, yeah.
And so the
Cool.
yeah, I'm exaggerating there a little bit for
Yeah,
the
yeah, no,
eagles,
no.
but
Oh.
the point is we actually close a lot of key gaps, and maybe not all,
Yeah.
but we take it out, and then for some, when I say some gaps, it's gaps in terms of validation or calibration, and one has to be pretty careful about which of these which of them is produced by the dynamic model, which is the reference, when you're comparing this empirical data, where does it go? How does it get linked to the model? Well, some of them are calibration.
Yeah.
Some of them, so calibration things, the model tries to predict this, and we try to tune the model to best predict this. Other cases are sort of elements of the model. Some relate, so parameter settings in the model. Some relate to intervention outcomes in the model. So we're looking at the impact of an intervention in real world, like an advisory,
Yeah.
and seeing how long does it affect someone's bathing behavior, in the ocean, how long does it affect their personal protective behaviors for
Yeah.
sun, how long does it affect their personal protective behaviors for mosquito-borne illness. And so there we're looking at sort of intervention effects. We're trying to see, when there's an intervention, how does it affect, sort of in a case crossover sort of way for an individual, how does it affect their moderate to vigorous physical activity. And we might ask survey questions about, is it because of perceived safety? Is it
Yeah.
because some aspect of walkability? But we can actually look, how much are they getting moderate to vigorous physical activity along sidewalks versus in recreational space? You know, like ball courts.
That's right, yeah.
And stuff like that. Certainly for sedentary behavior, we could look, how does it relate to time spent at home versus neighborhood walkability? We could ask, you know, when we see a lowered obesity level, to what degree is it affected by moderate to vigorous physical activity versus changes in sedentary behavior, versus eating habits associated with healthiness of diet due to time at home affecting their sort of caloric intake.
right, yeah.
And so the point is, with a smartphone, we can look at these, and Kim,
Yeah.
in a dynamic model that tries to account for the impact of this intervention, those are often the causal pathways that are represented in the model as well, or to some degree we try to capture them. So the smartphone allows us, rather than dealing with crude outcomes like obesity as a whole,
Yeah.
and then wondering why we see no change to this intervention, we can now open the gates and we can start to see, oh, well, we improved moderate to vigorous physical activity, but sedentary behavior was worsened due to more people spending time at home. And
Yeah.
maybe that, in the end, canceled out the effects.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that gives us, first of all, we can compare that against the model and improve the model from that, which is really improving our way of thinking about it, because the model captures our way of thinking
Yes, absolutely.
about the situation. It's kind of our current best hypothesis, or
Yeah.
dynamic working hypothesis. But more than that, Kim, we can use this, and this is a really key thing, we can use this to figure out what went wrong with the intervention, right? And between that and the model, an improved model, remember, one of the big goals of the model is to ask about what if questions, counterfactuals. So we
Yeah.
can then use the improved model together with, incorporating this evidence about what we moved, what we didn't,
Yeah.
to start to plan an improved intervention.
That's right.
An intervention that might improve sedentary behavior
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
And we could start to plan to sort of, how does that affect things? So the point is that often when we're dealing with traditional indicators, we are dealing with just a few small pieces of the system
Yeah.
and distal outcomes. And here we're looking at day-to-day behavior at a more detailed level that allows us to distinguish, to resolve, to discern the difference between impacts across different pathways.
Yeah.
And that is key for
That's
understanding why we see these outcomes, and it's key for improving the model.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's actually the key important, that I see the link between how we use the smartphone collection to the model. And from the model,
Yeah.
we can use the model kind of, what is missing in the model, what else do we understand from this model,
That's right.
to design another extra survey, extra information that we want to see.
That's
and
right.
then from that we put
That's
it in again.
that's right.
Yeah.
So it's models here are learning tools.
Yeah,
they're
that's
thinking
right.
tools. They help us learn more quickly from
Excellent.
empirical evidence.
Yeah.
And they're not crystal balls. They're ways of sort of reasoning consistently about our current guesses, current working hypothesis, to more quickly spot when it's inconsistent with the evidence.
Yeah.
And the smartphones provide a richer set of evidence. Some of that evidence is incorporated directly. Some is used to compare what the model predicts with what the smartphones capture. And with a dynamic model, we can then improve our way of thinking about the situation.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think this is actually really key, because this really helped me change the understanding of how we should model the dementia pathway now. Because I think the way that we think about it is really, yes, we need people participate. We want stakeholder to participate in,
Yeah.
and then tell us about the causal pathway and what they think is related.
Right.
But I think the missing that I still have, which now it's feel, is, well, there's a lot of missing data. We don't know where it's coming from.
Right.
But now we can understand that maybe we need them to tell us how it looked like
Right.
And then we will see what kind of data we can collect
Yeah.
using the smartphone
That's
to
right.
inform certain part of the model first.
That's right.
And then from that, we will continue to fit in.
That's right.
Because I think before this conversation, I'm still quite should we collect all the data at the same time?
Right.
Or do we collect the data incrementally
Yeah, okay.
upon a different part of the model? Which
Right.
I think
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
have the answer in a particular way.
And I think proceeding step by step, both because of privacy concerns, because of concerns regarding the sort of the scope of the ethics
that's
application,
right.
et cetera. I think collecting a smaller set, making sure participants are okay with it,
Yeah.
they're comfortable with it. You build up trust with them.
I think so.
And you can inform parts of this modeling, but more to the point, the model captures our understanding, right?
Yeah.
And really, you're informing the gaps in our knowledge base, the relevant knowledge base, and you are doing so in a way that that may reveal surprises.
Yeah.
You know.
So if you don't do it incrementally,
Yeah.
you're likely to miss.
Yeah, you may miss
miss
big
it.
areas of surprise, or those surprises we buried in a huge set of patterns that you don't actually get to explore for a year or two or three.
Yeah.
I think the idea of using the model with it to inform like which of these is important is good, but sometimes, I'm not a real rigid about this. I think sometimes there are whole areas of a model that are question mark, that
Yeah.
have big question marks against them about them.
We need an angel.
I think that sometimes just like probing those big unknowns
Yeah.
is really important. But I think you want to do it in a prioritized way.
Yeah.
Because it takes time to put together the ethics applications.
that's
It
right.
takes time to plan the studies, and you want to marshal your limited resources.
Yeah.
To focus on things that really are likely to matter the most.
Yeah.
And model is part of the evidence of that, but also there's just big gaps that you think need to be captured in the model but aren't right now, and they need to be filled in. And I'll readily say I collect a fair bit of this data with the smartphones that doesn't go directly into the model, but it's part of understanding what's going on. You know what I mean? Just what's happening.
Yeah.
It might go into a later model
Yeah.
because sometimes I don't know. Like, is my model? Does its scope need to change and so
Yeah.
on?
That's right.
Tell you one thing which really came out total surprise of our work with cigarettes and e-cigarettes with Kurt.
Yeah.
And I talk with experts in this area from our national agencies, and they're shocked by this sort of thing. It's just the profoundly different patterns
Yeah.
we see with cigarette and e-cigarette use.
Yeah.
So, my crude thinking about this situation was just a tacit assumption. I was thinking, people use cigarettes in a certain way. It's typically for a couple minutes, like maybe less than 10 minutes. And that I was thinking e-cigarettes used in the same way.
Yeah.
But it turns out that a lot of e-cigarette use seems to be in the form of people using it for hours on end. It's more like hookah use or something, where just for hours on end, they'll be taking puffs from it
Right.
while doing other things. So it's not like a smoking break is something we're used to think of like it's a break and then they stop smoking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And there's a natural length to it because the cigarette burns down.
Yeah.
And I was
Not
naturally
e-cigarette.
thinking that's true for e-cigarettes, but it's not. It's like you could go for hours and hours and hours. You might be able to go a whole day using this e-cigarette because there's no real short-term
Yeah.
limit to it. It's not like it burns down in a short time. So it totally changed my sense of what the exposures are like due to this. And we would not have found this except we were giving out smartphones and so on. And it was a real aha for me.
Yeah.
And it can, it made me think, okay, in our modeling, what I'd anticipated is having sort of a representation of smoking periods and non-smoking periods,
Yeah.
e-cigarette use periods and non-e-cigarette. But then it made me think, maybe that's not quite the right division. Maybe you need to think about when it starts and when it finishes in a more flexible way. It's not always just 3 minutes or 10 minutes. It's a longer period, right? That it can be for e-cigarette.
So yeah, it is true. So it's really actually also help us to actually understand.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So it's sometimes it change our whole perception of how things should work
That's right, exactly.
or
And
what actually happened because we don't know.
that's right,
Like,
and
we just
challenges.
hypothesize, yeah.
It challenges our hypotheses.
Yeah.
It can challenge our way of thinking about the situation in a good way, and that helps for a better model too.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not just filling in the unknown parameters. It's like it changes our thinking what the model structure is.
Yeah.
Changes our kind of conceptualization of how does the system work. What are even the categories? This is really important. And again, it's filling in our understanding, what we can say with confidence. This is really important. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, here, mobile technologies like for cigarette and e-cigarette, understanding here procurement people. This is something Kurt's really interested in. When do people go get it?
Yeah, that's right.
Product switching. What level of nicotine are they using? How does that relate to beliefs? I mean, another thing we found when working towards this study was, or something it came up just about that time, was this issue of, some people believe that using e-cigarettes is protective against cigarettes. Like by using them, they'll protect themselves against smoking.
Yeah.
So they use it and then they'll keep on smoking. Be more likely to keep on smoking because
That's right, and it's completely
it's completely
counterproductive,
Yeah.
isn't it? Because
Yeah.
the e-cigarette's supposed to be a substitute product,
right.
but it turned out to be a complementary
That's
or
complementary
a boosting.
or boosting. in
Yeah,
that case.
exactly.
In that
Which
case,
is
yeah.
like, I'm pretty sure the e-cigarette people don't like it.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So,
Yeah.
and we can understand, though, also things like, how does e-cigarette use depend on the environment, the social environment? How likely am I to start using e-cigarette if someone around me is an e-cigarette user right now?
Yeah.
This is more, that could go into a model, right? You're using e-cigarette, you send me a message saying I'm using, that makes me more likely. So what we observed there, based on the impact of the social environment, its impact on product use, that might be then built into a model as an assumption, as a parameter assumption. And so once again, we're kind of filling in some of those gaps, involving e-cigarettes, and we're capturing, okay, when are they using low nicotine level, medium or high nicotine levels, etc. How often are they switching these things? What prompted them to smoke a cigarette? I mean, we could have a model that articulates some of the drivers for occurrence of smoking or occurrence of e-cigarettes. You see what I mean?
Yep. So what do
Yeah.
you mean by vignette here?
Oh, these vignettes are just sort of examples of
Yeah.
situations that I use as kind of a story about ways you could bring together modeling
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and
yeah.
in this sort of
But
smartphone
not
based
in
data
the
collection.
survey because there's a vignettes for survey.
Oh
That's
no,
why. Yeah.
no,
Okay.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No,
No, these are
that's all good.
vignettes in terms of sort of
Giving
stories.
an example. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a couple of those, but yeah, we have ongoing work that might be helpful here.
Yeah, no,
But,
definitely,
yeah.
because I think that really give me a sort of a solid understanding of where I should start and how I should sort of
Yeah,
go about designing everything
right.
to get into the modeling.
Right, but
space, yeah.
I certainly want to imply very strongly or to communicate very strongly that, when you start doing this work with smartphones, you're going to collect lots of data that, in fact, have very little to directly do with. You're going to get lots of insights which are are not directly going to translate it to parameters in the
That's
model.
right, yeah.
They will often shape your model because
Mm.
they shape your way of thinking about the situation. But it's not like you're going to be doing this in a totally subservient way to modeling and you know
Mm. No,
that
yeah,
that
that's
that,
right.
that
That's-
all
that's a very
the all
good
the
point.
research products are in the dynamic model. That's not at
No,
all the
yeah,
case. You're going to
that's
get
right.
tons of
Data.
potential insights from the smartphone.
Mm.
And it's important to collect surveys that will allow you to do that,
Mm.
et cetera.
Can
Yeah.
I? Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no. It's great. I think that's really give me a solid expectation as well. Like what I should expect from data collection from smartphone and what I guess it can and it can't do in a certain way. Now my next question is related to once you get the data,
yeah.
what kind of analysis that you tend to do?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of them, but you know, just some sort of example. Obviously, I look at the way you look at it. You can look at bar chart, and
That's right.
pie chart,
Yeah.
and then try to
Yeah.
see percentage of thing happening.
Yeah.
But what else do you tend to use?
We use, and I have some other slides that relate to this in more details. This
Yeah.
is something I'm not able to talk about, and
This is a private part.
Yeah, a private tutoring part. I'm a bit lucky.
so she has to leave this afternoon.
Yeah,
so
I
I'm
have to
trying
leave at
I'm trying to-
4:45. So
Oh, okay. Are you
Yeah.
not going to be back tomorrow?
no. Well, that's the annoying bit that
Because tomorrow's
I
analysis.
just don't. I don't know why
Data analysis,
everything
not
have to
psychoanalysis.
happen in the same week. Like this is a dementia.
Conference.
Yeah, not conference. It's called a public seminar,
Oh, yeah.
and it's organized at the Queensland Brain Institute, which
Mm.
they are rising interest in research in dementia.
I see.
So, because I'm in Queensland and this
Yeah.
is going to be the biggest center to do
Yes,
dementia
you wanna
research,
go.
it's kind of awkward if I don't turn up.
Because all the old people move to Queensland, right?
Sorry?
Because all the old people move to Queensland to retire.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, the Sunshine Coast is a retirement village of Australia.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. Like literally
Florida and U.S.
overseas and Australia. Like
Wow.
they just move from other part
Wow.
to the Sunshine Coast.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's like a bit like European sort of villages
Yeah.
feeling,
Oh.
like hinterland and
Wow.
things. So it's really, really popular.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is. I think it has the highest retirement population in Australia in terms of percentage
Wow.
of the whole. Not Brisbane, the
Yeah.
Sunshine Coast, which is not a Brisbane.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
it's all retirement village and nursing home there.
Wow.
So you got everything's on this week, basically.
Yeah, like literally.
Wasn't there an economist who said time is a device to stop everything happening at once?
Absolutely,
Oh.
and
Is it Stan Nelson
totally.
or something
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
That's right.
Exactly, because it is a constraint.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a real constraint. Like if you have unlimited time, then it really means that you have unlimited resources.
plug.
I had unlimited time.
Yeah, so the same thing, I
Yeah.
think, yeah. So yeah, no, it was really good because I know that Ned is going to run
So
through
what are you brainstorming here?
mainly the interface between smartphone data collection and dynamic simulation.
Oh,
So
like
I
that
just want to
sort of
understand
Like that. from
at
the
what
arrows.
point, like when is the smartphone, like how the smartphone data collection interacted with, or inform the dynamic simulation part. And, like the sort of a process of doing it. And my next question is, once you get the data from smartphone, what kind of
Analysis.
analysis you could do, obviously.
Well,
Hey, yo.
Uh,
But I mean, I'm sure
Hey,
I'm
yo.
repeating something that you've said here, mate, but
Yeah.
with modelling, you're going through all these iterations.
that's right, exactly. So,
But
Well,
and
yeah.
the flexibility of FField means that you can go back and go, I just need to know this.
That's right.
This
A little
extra
bit
thing,
more,
and
yeah.
And now another question's arisen, and you can just push it out
yeah,
for the next day.
yeah,
You got it. You got this.
yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've been working in
Yeah.
area health, thinking about this and thinking why don't we have this? Why can't we have this? It's all technically feasible.
Yeah.
For many years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before I found you, man.
That's right.
Yeah, this is no. But it takes a while to understand the sort of the full implications. But yes, you've got a lot of it. That's amazing, and that's great. And it's I think it's going to really enable a lot of learning. That
Yeah.
is very difficult to
I
do. Or
really
very
think so.
cumbersome or very burdensome.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we introduce this quite openly to a lot of people, because I think a lot of the time I feel when I work with clinicians and nurses and especially policymakers, I'm not saying that they close-minded or anything, it's just because this is a new thing.
Right.
And when it's new and they don't see the implication immediately, it's very high resistant to
Yep.
change or accept a little bit of this.
Right.
But if you I think the good thing is you can introduce it piecemeal, and it like tell you there's a story about it here,
Yeah. Well, what
and
often-
then
That's
keep
right.
going and going, and once they get used with the idea, they might happy to jump another step. Like it just have to work like that.
Right. I mean, what often happens is.
Loitering with intent.
Dynamic intent.
That's a criminal offence.
So what often happens is, and you see it at this boot camp. I mean, what people grab onto at first is the surveys, because this
Yeah.
is like a, it's a familiar territory.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is a very convenient way to issue surveys, right?
Yeah.
But then you start,
Cheap.
and cheap,
And it reaches young people.
inflexible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you start to, though, think about, okay, there's all this sensor stuff that we can get to. Okay, location. How could that factor in as a risk factor?
Yeah,
How
that's
could it
right.
factor in terms of exposure? And you start thinking about also, broadening it so that the sensors are not merely used to kind of trigger the surveys as kind of an accessory. They start to be kind of measures of significance themselves, and then you start to get even more sophisticated sensor measures, which are things like the predictability of someone's life and so on, and
Yeah.
using that and tracking that over time
That's
as sort
right.
of as it's impacted by an intervention or something by
Predictability.
housing. Yeah, so this
Sort of
we'll have
they
to
move
Like
the talk about
determinants,
this.
yeah.
Like
movement, or you can do it
Go
with
to
other
work, come home
things.
same day,
That's right,
something.
and you think
Weekends.
about someone with this came up a lot in the discussion about homeless people and about individuals with who are HIV affected, as well as veterans with PTSD.
Yeah.
I mean, because someone who's at home all the time never gets out.
Yeah.
That's problematic.
yeah, and their
they
well-being.
right,
Yeah.
if they live, by contrast, think about maybe a veteran who's homeless, and they don't know where they're going to sleep that night.
Yeah.
And their life is totally unpredictable in terms
They
of
have
where
too
they
much of
end
it.
up, and traveling between cities, and staying with one relative. It's too much entropy, and you want someone with who's got a balance there
Yeah.
in terms of entropy, and so it is with clinical populations for HIV, because like our clinical partners tell us what they do a lot of the time is they bring in patients and they spend a while getting to know a patient
Yep.
as to like
It's
how
very,
reliable
very
they are
difficult,
in
yeah.
terms of taking the medication,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
often they need to see them,
Yeah.
and it's very hard to assess at first. Imagine if you could give them a phone,
Yeah.
give one of these people a phone for
Yeah.
10 days, say you carry this with you, and basically that informs your initial clinical designation in terms, do we meet you once a week?
Yeah.
Do we meet you once every quarter?
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
fingerprint of kind of predictability or turmoil in your life.
Yeah.
And maybe the phone can ask them can ask them to take a photo when they're taking pills, and can ask them a little bit about the struggles they're going through,
Yeah.
et cetera. And you emerge from that with a much better, quicker understanding of that patient's needs, and it allows you to put them into a better clinical
I'm
category.
just thinking clinically.
Yeah.
This is me as
Yeah.
a clinician who sees people for 55-minute sessions.
Wow.
you could use that in a therapeutic way. If
Mm.
you can give them free text answers where they're sort of
Yeah.
almost journaling through
That's right.
Ethica.
Yeah.
And then if with the appropriate permissions,
Yeah.
if the clinician reads that and says, okay, so I've read that you've been writing about this and that.
That's right.
That
Yeah.
will build a lot of rapport
Yeah.
Yeah.
quickly.
Well,
But-
I guess that's the really benefit of the voice
Yeah.
recording, because I'm just seeing in the context of care of people with dementia, they're not gonna like to type on their little tiny phone, but if you can actually
Yeah.
just
You could have a narrative.
say
Yeah.
say a couple of sentences why you are
That's right.
really stressed, then obviously it's definitely more resources in there, but I think in the context of exploring the causal pathway, what could be a good design for future study, this can be extremely useful.
Right.
Because you can just say that, what is your main problem now, and maybe just summarize in a couple of sentences. I
Right.
mean, you will have someone who will say for half an hour, but some will say, I can't find this, I can't find that, I forget the medication, they're
that-
wandering again.
That's right. I was kicked
And
out of
that's
my
it,
home. and-
exactly. And then
yeah,
it
and that's,
just,
I mean, as a survey researcher, you want, like early on in the survey, you
Yeah.
have that open-ended, top-of-mind
That's
type
right.
question.
yeah.
What are you thinking about right now? What's your biggest problem right now?
Yeah, that's
Just-
right. And then it helps you guide the future data collection, because then
That's right. And as one of my colleagues who's leading a study going on right now is, as he says, the light bulb turned on for him. He said, wait a minute, with a system like this, we can actually mix qualitative and quantitative
Absolutely.
research methodology, even get sort of narrative reports
Yeah,
from
that's right.
people.
Yeah.
And ask about barriers to things,
Yeah.
to behaviors, not only observe behaviors, but ask why, you haven't gone and visited,
Yeah,
what
your
were
mom,
the
yeah,
barriers,
yeah.
why you haven't, there's this, this community-owned grocery store offering fresh fruits and vegetables that, what is it that why is it you haven't visited that recently?
Yeah.
As well as, when they do visit it, how did you get there, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of different ways this could be configured to give that broader insight, give some quantitative results, all the data with it,
yeah.
but also the knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, intentions, perceptions.
Yeah, that's right.
Which
Yeah.
which are explanatory factors for understanding these causal pathways. They help understand the drivers for
Yeah.
things.
Well, that's exactly what I think is the useful of it, because like a lot of the time we're sitting here and clinician might think, this is why it happened, and you can have a map of causal pathway. When you go and ask them why they think so, it might be completely different.
That's right.
Like the story can be massively
right.
different,
That's
and then
right.
you have to restructure all of your things.
Exactly.
So I actually really think that, like when you have a pilot study, I mean, after the conversation with you, I realize it's a case that, maybe voice and free text can be a burden overall if you have massive data collection. But in a pilot one, where you try to
Yeah.
really nail down what is going on,
That's right.
to do your survey or your model better
That's
in the
right.
next
Yeah.
iteration, it is valuable.
Good, a very good
so
point.
so much.
That's a very good
yeah,
point.
Yeah.
yeah.
For low-
so much
yeah.
variable. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
low end, you kind of approximate a focus group by
Yeah,
using lots of
exactly.
pretext.
Yeah, it
Exactly.
really is the case.
And,
Yeah,
and open-ended questions.
that's right. Exactly.
But you might get, like you do a smaller scale study of 50 or 100 people.
That's
you
right,
sort
exactly.
of get a sense of what some of the major themes are,
Yeah.
major issues, to basically figure out if your mental model of the important things to ask is off. Are you getting, do you understand the essential things in the trenches from
Yeah.
the people
Yeah.
who are there, not from the experts, but
Yeah.
who may be thinking they're understanding it, but from the people there, are there any big things you're missing about
Yeah.
the situation? And then you use that to have
Yeah.
maybe go to other rounds, which maybe go to much larger groups
Yeah.
that are using more quantitative instruments,
Yeah.
and therefore involve less analysis burden in terms of transcription and
yeah.
stuff like
well,
that.
that's exactly what I mean, it's
Yeah.
totally, this conversation totally changed
Mm.
the way I'm going to organize the study now, not just, our dementia study, our carer, but also how I'm going to approach the modeling now.
Mm.
Because it's really, And I think that I definitely need to sit down with clinicians. We need to have focus group to understand what they think about the causal pathway. But by using this phone, this is going to be a hook for carer, because if they want to have a model, understand how we can help them,
Yeah.
it is them to tell us what they feel, how they make their own decisions. So this is
Yeah.
where their input to our modeling, to make decision, to evaluate things is here. It's really, that's how we sell it to them in that sense. And I think from on the focus group I attended, that's what they want to hear. Because they will feel, like if you go and ask them to collect data, they will do it. A lot of them are super nice. But then again, really, in the end, what they see is a final report of something.
Yeah.
I don't think that's always what they want to see.
Right.
What they want to see is, this is what we say broadly, and this is what you're mapping them in here. And does it match?
Jeff-
Do
Jeff-
we actually
yeah.
generally tell, like, do we represent your concern well?
Yeah,
or,
See, this is the thing. What Jeff says, and he says a lot of it is storytelling.
yeah,
And not in the sense of weaving any old story. It's they would like their story to be captured.
That's
somehow.
right.
They'd like to have confidence that not only are you putting out numbers which are somehow theoretically well grounded, but
Yeah.
but somehow that you've captured
The
a lot of the
individuality.
essentials of their situation,
Yeah, that's
their
right.
context of their struggles.
yeah. They definitely really like the idea that each of us have our own journey.
Right.
We are different. And I think that's a really key message to work with them,
Yeah.
because they don't like statistics, because they think that we
Right.
aggregate them into a group, which
Right.
we have to, because this is
Yeah.
making decision. However, this is going to be a perfect tool to say, this is where your story will be
Where
heard.
your voice
How-
is
that's
heard.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
And literally, it may
Yeah,
be
it
your
is.
voice
Yeah, we're
being
hearing you.
heard.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and this is what this collaborator is running the study Tarun that I mentioned. I mean, he's got this online site for participants.
So
Tarun
Turin?
Tarun Katapalli is
Oh,
his
okay.
name.
So I thought you said Turin as in the city in Italy.
No, Tarun
Yeah.
Katapalli. He's at University of Regina. You can look him up. Great guy. He's doing this, in this way where he gets participant voices, and then I think this is all with the, earliest ethics approval, but he may have had to do an amendment to go back to people. But basically, he's getting literally their voices about their community, about barriers and supports for physical activity, and he's putting it online in terms of a page of like voices from the community.
Yeah.
In a way that allows people to feel like my voice is being heard.
Absolutely,
collectively.
yeah.
And they have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
point is that it fits into this notion of citizen science, crowdsourcing, etc. And this is an important thing if you can tap it, an important vein of, it's not just some white-coated researchers collecting data and
Yeah.
using me like a lab
Yeah.
animal. It's like
Yeah.
it's like we're in this together. We're documenting our joint struggles. My voice is
Yeah.
being heard. My day-to-day texture of my life is being captured in its richness, not
Yeah.
just as a few
Like
sort of sterile questions
Yeah.
and some big questionnaire.
Yeah.
It's actually like my back and forth to visit my mother.
Exactly, yeah.
Through heavy traffic
Yeah.
and so on. My times where I can't visit her, times where I'm feeling burnt out. Somehow that's being captured. If you can capture that in a relationship of trust,
Yeah.
then you've achieved something great.
Yeah, and I think the side of it is actually, and you're absolutely right, this is really a way to have mixed method.
Right.
You can do both, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can actually talk about it, using this kind of method to, like, say, kind of a focus group. But the benefit of this is really it's not influenced by anything. In focus group, the problem is
Yeah,
people
the
are
social
concerned about the
processes,
aspect.
right.
They're not necessarily always open
Yeah.
about what they experience now. They can talk a little bit about it, and sometimes they can be vocal about it, But then it's always a case where there's someone dominated the table.
Oh yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
you know, you kind of talk around it, and it become quite a biased experience
I see,
overall.
yeah.
Why this
That's-
is a case where, you know, you basically talk to someone, like it's someone hearing you
Yeah.
and maybe talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my work with corporates and
Yeah.
teamwork processes,
Yeah.
you look at the research into what happens in meetings. And
Yeah.
You've got 8 people in the meeting. You
Yeah.
look at a bar chart of who talked for
Yeah.
how long.
Yeah.
And there are 2 or 3 people who talk who take up most of the time.
That's right.
And there's a tail of people who talk hardly at all.
Yeah.
And you get the older males talking and the women and
That's
younger
right.
people being
Yeah.
quiet.
Yeah.
No, but I think
That
it,
pollutes
it,
focus group data.
it's really, really, actually, really important for my
Yeah.
understanding of
Yeah.
how we can. Well, I've kind of
Yeah.
make a note, and I hopefully get this recorded.
So only if people gave permission to give their, to publish their answers to,
Yeah.
to an
Oh, yeah.
open-ended question,
Yeah.
just put it up on
Yeah.
the website,
Yeah.
3 of them, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a
Or
lot of
page
case
64.
studies
Well,
actually
and change
do
it
that.
each week.
Yeah, that's right. The case study is about it. A lot of people doing interview, and then you know you have qualitative report.
Exactly.
It's publish all case study. This is the situation. This is what they say, and this is what we found. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many publication around that already. So it's definitely not
Da-
a
that's
new
right.
method. It's just much easier to do it now.
Down the road, and this is not something Ethica, I think, is going to do immediately. It's something I've been talking to them about, and it's come up a number of times, and I actually think it's a good idea. But you know, we need a client who's willing to pay for it to
Yeah.
become a reality. But you know, this idea of, for example, people sharing voluntarily, just like you could share your Fitbit data.
Yeah, that's
if you
right.
could share
Fitness
your
buddies.
the data, some of the data you've contributed, like your survey answers for certain
that's right.
surveys, with your community or members of your work group or members from your family or
Yeah, that's
members
right.
of your, you know, your social group, your football club or whatever.
Yeah.
You could share it with them explicitly on the Ethica site. So
Yeah.
you could actually, you know, you
It's
could
like
see.
a social room. It's a
Exactly.
bit like, you know, like you join a room or a secret
right.
group, and then
Yeah.
you share your information.
You-
and
you-
people do
you
it all
pull-
the time
yeah,
now.
you pull your information.
Yeah.
And you start to build up, you know, a map
More
of
like
your
a support
community, a
group,
map
yeah. Hmm.
of your struggles, a map of your sort of concerns or barriers or what have you. And if they're geotagged or time tagged or what have you, you might be able to see them in a quite compelling way.
Hmm.
You know, it's I think just in terms of incentives, like why would people want to contribute to this?
Yeah.
That really
That
draws
effort.
people in.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
Because it's like we're each filling in a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's right.
And there are these, you know, Jeff tells me, I remember 6 years ago, wherever he was talking to me, you know, about sites like Patients Like Me and so on, where people, it's a community, it's people contributing
Yeah.
and helping each other's knowledge, and you may get a communities like that evolved on Ethica.
Yeah.
And just as like we said, I think it is mixed methods. For a given study, it may be that in many times you go from more qualitative to less, with some quantitative, but comparatively more qualitative questions to more and more quantitative
Yes.
for certain things as
Yeah.
your knowledge gets firmer.
I think
not
so, yeah.
always,
Yeah.
not always, but you know,
That's how I
there may be
imagine it
a
would look
progression
like, yeah.
there, or at least you have the option of it. And when you do that, you know, the types of questions that you're asking will
Hmm.
be different, but because they already have the app downloaded on their phone,
Yeah.
it may be many of the same participants, and they just opt into a new study, and it's
Yeah.
so much easier.
Yeah,
You know.
I think that's what I actually quite interested in doing now. Like if we design now, I think that's exactly what I would think about. You know,
A
for the
staged,
pilot
a staggered
study, it's
approach.
actually So you can start with enrolling them, but start with really my moderate question in the sense that
Yeah.
you tell us about your story. For a certain period of time, maybe
Yeah.
3 months, you collect those data,
Interesting.
looking at it, and then pop out more survey
Yeah.
based on what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I don't mean only qualitative,
Yeah.
but that
yeah,
could be
yeah,
a bigger
no,
component,
yeah, that's right. It's reduced component
Yeah.
over time when we have more solid idea.
Yeah.
In my impression of the papers that you cited for in the grant applications
Yeah.
for dementia carers, was
Yeah.
that there was some research out there, but there wasn't a ton of stuff.
No,
Was there?
not
Mm.
at all. I think dementia research are mostly in a nurse and social work concept,
Mm.
and especially about
Yeah,
I have an
professional care.
intervention. I have an intervention. I want to look at
Yeah.
it, and then see if it's effective or not.
Well, that's
Like
why we get
basically that
funding,
is
right?
yeah, exactly. So
An intervention or
I think
RCT.
in the funniest way is all of the consumer, you know, people with
Yeah.
dementia and their carer, kind of saying that they're happy to contribute to participate in intervention, but a lot of the time when the funding's gone, it's gone.
Right.
You know, like they don't feel that there's anything for them apart from that particular period of time.
Right.
Why? I guess it's always you can sort of project yourself slightly different in terms of this is not about we giving you an intervention yet. It's we want to understand you so then
Right.
we can design intervention to help you. It's not like we have an idea. This is how it look like.
Mhm.
It's more like a bottom up approach.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one of the way that we have to sell it, and it's true. Like it's really the motivation
Yeah.
that I have.
And you know, I'll be clear here. I mean, I think what we're talking about is at the absolute cutting edge of our
Yeah.
of what's done. And,
Yeah.
and frankly, I think these discussions are, you know, among the first edge of something that's going to be really changing
Yeah.
health research in
Yeah.
coming decades. And so
Yeah.
we're going to have to figure out a lot of things, and it may be in different domains, different strategies.
that's
you know,
right, yeah.
Our work are right, and even you know, there's very intriguing questions. Even if you have more qualitative things, that doesn't mean there's like the sensor data may be really helpful to answer to allow you to deliver those in lower burden ways. So you don't have to describe every time where you are or what have
Yeah,
you.
yeah, that's
People
right,
can just
yeah.
dive into this place, you know, has this meaning for me, or you know,
Yeah, that's right.
these barriers, and just so much time of day, the location, your recent history is sort of given, you know, that it can really make contributing a lower burden activity
Yeah.
than writing, diarying down,
Yeah,
having someone
absolutely,
follow
yeah.
you around
Yeah.
or something like that, which has a lot to recommend. You know, this has a lot to bring to bear as sensor data. It's useful there. But you know, the other thing, because you had asked about, and I know you have to, time is ticking.
No, it's not. I still have about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay,
it's
so
fine.
the issue, you know, one of the issues is that this sort of research is also cutting edge in the sense that how it needs to involve people from multiple disciplines, sort of interdisciplinary research, in a fundamental way. Because the analysis side of this is, some of it can be undertaken with traditional tools.
Yeah.
Like you download the survey data from there. You could undertake analysis of that survey data in fairly traditional tools.
That's right,
As
exactly,
Peter
yeah.
says-
Library.
says-
That's right, exactly. Yeah, you
That's
just
it.
say that 10 times. That's
Perfectly
it. Yeah.
normal.
That's
Yeah.
right.
But
But there's a lot of other data. You know, even for conceptually coherent, familiar things, we want to understand, for example, you know, the level of exposure of this person to UV
Yeah.
over the course of their summer, and how does that differ, right?
Yeah.
Or we want to understand the exposure of this person to particulates, you know, or to you know, some other measure of sort of NO2 or something like that in the city. Conceptually, that's a simple thing involving cross-linking their location on the one hand with the records of like what levels of particulates obtained in a given geographic area, or what levels of UV is measured for their city.
sort of carefully human study style.
What's that?
Like the carefully human study.
Yeah, it may be, but it's a conceptually fairly straightforward thing. It's like a dot product of these things at a technical level. But the point is that the tools they're like for realistic application. You want you really would like to have a computer scientist or someone from math or a sort of a computational statistics
Yeah.
background or something,
Yeah.
working in conjunction with people in the health sciences
Yeah.
to sort of make this possible. There
Yeah.
are tools. We'll see tomorrow. Unfortunately, you won't. But we'll
That's-
see tomorrow.
Yeah.
There are tools.
Well,
like
I will look
Video.
at the videos anyway, but yeah, it's
network
still-
visualization tools,
Yeah.
GEFI, which can be applied. You can apply them very easily.
Yeah.
But then there's other tools, as Anton knows, Spark, for example, which are incredibly powerful, but they're much easier for someone trained in
Yeah.
engineering,
Yeah.
computer science
Yeah,
to apply.
exactly. Yeah.
Computational stats and
Yeah.
just figuring out the ways that people from these different sort of come together. I think a lot of it, you have to understand, it's not a matter of the computer scientists know it. Computer scientists don't know what to do. They only know how to do it if you tell them
yeah.
what to do.
Yeah.
The health side people often have some sense of what to do, but they don't understand exactly how to do
it,
some
yeah.
of the analyses.
Yeah.
And you need that meeting the minds. I mean, my lab is about training transdisciplinary people. You have
Yeah.
people like Kurt who can understand the health terminology
Yeah,
enough
that's right.
that they can work in a fairly fluid way to deliver on the needs from the health science side without a lot of translation, without Anton having to unpack it into technical terminology.
Yeah.
I have some computer science colleagues who I remember saying, if you're going to come to me with a request, you have to express it in a computer science way
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I'm not interested in
Yeah.
learning clinical law, and that's not the way we
Yeah,
get things done.
that's right, yeah.
You want this sort
Someone
of
to
ability,
work-
someone to
someone
work
to-
with
yeah,
who can at least go halfway and
Yeah.
speak a lot of the same language.
Yeah.
And at the same time, someone like Kurt is not going to have nearly the insight either of you two would on the health side about what to look for. So
Yeah.
there's got to be this, I think, this back and forth and this training, and it really does help to have some transdisciplinary components. But that's a very radical notion,
Yeah.
sort of transdisciplinary training and
The flip side of the problems that we're trying to solve.
what's that?
It's the flip side.
That's
of
exactly right.
Yeah.
They're complex and multi.
That's right.
Factorial.
They're
Yeah.
messy,
and
sort of,
messy and
Yeah.
and they cross
all kinds of very
boundaries.
different things.
Yeah,
They
so-
cross silos.
That's right. And so it's natural in a way that they require this fulsome team
That's
approach.
right. Exactly. Yeah.
It's just, it's rarely achieved, but I'm saying to the degree we can move towards achieving it, we can really benefit from, in terms of, productivity, in terms of effectiveness, of the ability to answer questions
Yeah,
and so on.
that's right, yeah.
And so when you ask him about, what sorts of analyses get applied, there are some analyses that you're going to be very familiar with.
Yeah.
Logistic regressions
Yeah.
and some tools from biostatistics in terms of survival analysis,
That's right,
etc. There's going to be some constructs that are very familiar in terms of contingency tables, sort of cost tabs,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, which are really useful. Scatter plots, etc. These are all very important things when analyzing this data. I don't minimize that, but
Can I interrupt you
Uh-huh.
briefly?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
oh my
so
gosh.
That's a Chinese thing.
Oh,
So
wow.
Yes or no.
Oh wow.
So this, where is this?
Oh,
thing?
okay,
So
it-
basically done.
yeah.
I just did.
These notifications.
How do you get rid of
hang on,
this?
allow me to-
Oh well.
when
you-
Okay.
you
Yeah.
can
No.
say
Yeah,
no,
Do you
no.
mean-
so that one-
Oh. Okay. You could say no.
Then we go back.
Back-
The
is
back
it
button.
back?
down
there
here.
are.
So yes,
Oh my
this is
gosh.
the survey. Say, Essica can display Chinese, and then say, do you only speak
Oh,
Chinese?
wow.
Yes or no? So
And
you
have you
know,
got it forking to English
Oh my
language
gosh.
versus.
Oh
Well,
wow.
it's just displayed in Chinese
Yeah.
so that
Yeah,
You did
can
it.
actually do it.
participants
Yeah, that's
can,
right.
can
Can
understand
answer, yeah.
and
You
I
did
think
it.
into.
That's
I
great.
just
Oh.
spoke to.
Did you show Muhammad?
Yeah, you said.
Yeah, that's
you said
awesome.
You can just just give us like 200 questions or buttons displays, and then we can actually have all of these things like the actions about
Oh, wow.
data sources all displayed in Chinese, and then the person,
Wow.
participant can see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Everything
it's
in Chinese.
really important
Yeah.
because I think at
Because
the moment
a
most
big-
of the
big
research is done
population.
in native English.
Right.
You know, participant. Why you know, CULT is actually a big group, and it's
Right.
more and more.
And in Australia,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Chinese population.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
huge,
that's true.
yeah.
That's,
That is amazing.
these days, I think the display, looks so quite. As long as you have a way to enter, and which is quite easy.
Yeah.
Just voice to text
Yeah.
or something. It's all really very
That-
easy.
That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I think so. Absolutely.
See, basically, my apps
Oh,
are
yeah.
all mixture of Chinese and
Yeah.
English. Yeah, so if you look
Yeah.
anything, mostly
Wow.
Chinese.
Wow.
So you actually, you display things.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
Because
so
I think
it's so
if you
convenient.
think about it, like a lot of Chinese research would be really interested in the tool.
Yeah.
The fact that Ethica is also have an interface in another language will increase its popularity hugely.
And I mentioned to
Absolutely.
Xiaowen that there are some researchers who have proposed to me, could we use this in certain contexts overseas? Like, could we use it? The one I remember very clearly is, could we use it to study the effects of as sort of factors related to exposure to pollutant levels in mainland China?
Yeah. I
Um,
guess you probably don't really need to get ethical approval to collect information from them.
Well, I
Are
think we
going to use-
would. We would need to, but they could do it overseas potentially. I'd have to. I'm not sure what the.
Yeah, I don't
what the
think
process is.
Chinese research has such rigorous ethical approval system.
a friend of
that
mine
Wow.
everything.
I think
you
but
do
our
in-
university would want
Yeah,
want
we
it.
will have something
Yeah.
in general, but not as
I don't
detailed
really know.
as
Oh,
know.
It's
not even
GR
mine.
or this
Is that right?
No, it's
yeah,
Korean.
I think
That's
probably a bit easier.
Right. Wow. Yeah, but great job with that. That's amazing. So he's going to give you the things to translate.
Yeah, I think that's
Amazing.
not-
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of these things are biostatistical. Some
Yeah.
of them are sort of familiar statistical measures.
Yeah.
And characterizing data in terms of analysis. Others are machine learning tools.
Yeah.
So there's things like hidden Markov models and support vector machines, they're called, or Bayes nets for inferencing,
Yeah.
which are tools from computational statistics and machine learning,
Yeah.
but they're used for classifying, for example.
Yeah.
Is someone indoors or outdoors? Are they even carrying the phone right now? Are they in a vehicle right now? What posture are they in? These are sort of classifiers. And then there's in inference mechanisms. And then there's tools for, I would say, higher level analysis that include dynamic modeling, very notably. To sort of understand the effects of how does this relate to intervention outcomes and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
that's right.
And the analyses that we do with this data, therefore, it's almost like there's if not a stack of them, there's a kind of a collection of different ones. And a given study might be heavier in some than others. And it's not like to get any value, you need all of them.
Yeah.
It's just that to really rise to the potential of the data, you need this collection of
tools.
different types of tools to be possible. And and often some of them are routine things, like, for example, for many of our studies, we've run these analyses that classify, is the phone being carried or not? And just for the times where it's not being carried, we exclude those from certain types of analysis because it's not representative of the person.
Yeah.
The person has left it there. They may be in another building. They may be,
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know, out
Yeah,
swimming, and it's not representative. The data is not representative of them.
I think people like me with less statistical
Yeah. Yeah.
knowledge than you guys, I need to be more aware just of what these tools are and what they do.
Yeah.
Even if
Yeah.
I can't use them just yet.
Yeah.
Just so that when I'm designing a study, I can
Yeah.
have them thinking, well, we can analyze this
Right.
using this tool and this tool.
Right.
Yeah.
But it would really be helpful if I included this question
That's
Yeah.
to enable that. Because,
Well, I
At the
assume
moment, I
that
don't
you
know
will
that.
mention some tomorrow.
Oh, I'm
I
going to be going
guess,
through
yeah.
some of them.
Yeah,
And
but I think what I found is a lot of the time with data analysis, it's learning by doing. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, you collect those kind of answers, yes and no. You might be able to just look at them using pie chart, and then another level you can use a simple regression, you know, something like that, and then you start to
That's
proceed
that's
to
exactly
a lot
right.
more, like dealing with the GPS data where
That's right.
people zigzag like that. You might have a completely different method of how to
Th-
pinpoint
That's
the
right,
information.
and sort of what aggregate measures we want to
That's
derive
right,
from
yeah.
this data. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not all about, you know, I should have made this
I'm just
point
going
earlier
to
today.
get my back.
Sure, it's not all about, as you know, data at the level of great detail. We might create these summary measures of like UV exposure index for a participant, or
something fairly blunt.
something fairly blunt, but it's a summary of a lot of observations of that participant, maybe crossed with UV levels for those days that they're out. So it's a pretty savvy, you know, sort of measure.
Yeah.
But it ends up summarizing it in one number, or you know, a number per month or something like that. You know, it changes over time. But the point is that this isn't a cacophony of super detailed analyses. This may be you use this detail to arrive at much more savvy overall measures. You know, another example that Mohammed did very early on was for a given participant,
Pull age and sit down.
degree of access to healthy fruits and vegetables. And
Yeah.
and there he was looking at the people's life spaces where they actually traveled during the day as part of their
Yeah.
to and fro from work to home and so on, and asking how close is that to, you know, places where fresh fruits and vegetables are
How
vended.
far would they have to go off their actual
Exactly.
paths, as opposed to a cruder measure of
Based on their
distance from
home.
or distance from
Or
home
distance,
and work,
yeah,
say.
precisely, or density of that sort of food in their metropolitan statistical area or something like that. So the point is, he did that calculation, and that ended up with a, you know, that could boil down to a measure for that participant that could be pretty useful. It's a
Could
very
even
informed
add
measure.
sampling behaviour to that, to take it a step further, I suppose.
Yeah.
Have you bought, I don't know, fresh fruits and vegetables from anywhere recently?
Yeah.
Use supplement
Yep.
behaviour as well as.
Right.
Why don't you go ahead?
That's right. And
No,
there
no,
may
no.
be
Sit down,
aspects
'cause-
of knowledge of where those
Are
are.
you actually going now?
Yes, I will have to go very
Are you, so you're going back up to Brisbane?
Yeah, my flight's at 6.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was
You have,
thinking we-
oh, it is recorded.
Yeah, it is recording.
This is all recorded.
I was wondering if you were recording this.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then I thought
absolutely.
surely not. No, but what I was thinking was